to serve the American people. That's what motivated Robert Byrd earlier, and it's what ought to motivate us today, Mr. President. Keeping that promise means standing up for the sanctity of our country's founding document and the integrity of this institution. Thank you, Mr. President, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. As we wait for a senator to speak, a majority of House and Senate conferees have signed off on the deal that extends the payroll tax cut and unemployment benefits and prevents a cut in doctors' payments who treat Medicare patients. The House is expected to vote on adopting the conference report on Friday, with the Senate likely to vote shortly after that. But we did hear from at least one senator earlier, Mark Warner, that he will not vote for the deal. We spoke with a reporter about the bill.
Reporting for The Hill, Bernie Becker. Now that House and Senate negotiators have settled on a plan to extend a payroll tax cut, when will we see votes in the House and Senate?
That does seem to be the next big question. So the House is, by the rules, the next day they would supposed to be able to vote would be Saturday, but all indications are that they would not want to do that. They just want to get this wrapped up tomorrow. They'll waive that rule, and they certainly don't want to have this fester over recess. So chances are that both the House and the Senate will get this done tomorrow.
On the agreement itself, what do you know of how they resolved paying for the bill?
Well, earlier this week, in what seems like to have been the big sort of energizer to this, House Republican leaders dropped their demand that the payroll tax be offset. That's about $100 billion, or about 2/3 of the entire deal. And then over the last few days, there have just been some last talks about how to offset the Medicare doc fix and the unemployment insurance, which were the other two parts. And then last night, one of their proposed offsets was federal pension cuts, and some Maryland Dems had some issues with that, and then they've made a last-second compromise on that, and they seem to have, everybody seems to be on the same page.
So they're on the same page, and your sense from this is that when it comes to, at least to the House, it will pass?
It will. I think if you talk to sort of people in the know in the House, they'll say that it probably won't pass just with GOP votes, that they will need Dems on this. There are some more conservative Tea Party types in the House that will not go for this, but all 5 Dems in the House that were on the conference committee did sign it. So all indications are that there will be a bipartisan majority on that side.
You mentioned some of the Maryland representatives, some Washington area lawmakers with the concerns over that provision that requires federal government employees to pay more into their pension funds. Mm-hmm. What can you tell us of the final compromise, or do you know yet?
We do seem to have some sense. It seems like what they got was the changes to contributions to retirement stuff will only start with new employees. Folks who are already on the rolls will get to sort of stay where they are, and the folks who start new will know basically exactly where they stand.
Well, earlier it had been reported Ben Cardin, obviously a Maryland senator, had some concerns about that. How about the Senate? What's the timetable there, and will it pass in the Senate as well?
Well, that does seem to be the more interesting question. I think what you saw is that Senate GOPers on the conference committee look like they're not going to sign it, and that gave Cardin a little extra leverage to get those sorts of changes he wanted. And it's this doesn't seem like it's quite as good a deal for the GOP, so there's not as much incentive for Republicans in the Senate to support this.
So conceivably, this could arrive on President Obama's desk this weekend. What's his position? Is he likely to sign it?
Oh, he's definitely likely to sign it. He has called this if not the top priority for 2012. I think he thinks this will definitely help the economy, and if it helps the economy, it likely helps his re-election chances.
Reporting on the payroll tax cut conference agreement, Bernie Becker with The Hill. Read his reporting at thehill.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So as we just heard, the House and the Senate are both expected to vote tomorrow on adopting the payroll tax cut deal. The pending business here in the Senate is the surface transportation bill. Off the floor, senators continue negotiations on amendments. The pending business here in the Senate, the two-year, $109 billion surface transportation bill that pays for roads, bridges, and mass transit. An update on our primetime schedule here on C-SPAN 2. The Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, and Army Lieutenant General Ronald Burgess, the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, both spoke before the Senate Armed Services Committee today, saying that al-Qaeda of Iraq was likely behind a series of bombings against the Syrian regime in recent months. You can see that hearing at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on C-SPAN 2.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I take this time to talk about the conference committee that has been filed in regards to the extension of the payroll tax holiday, the Medicare physician issues so that our seniors can continue to have access to their doctors, and the extension of the unemployment insurance. I was appointed to that conference, and that conference has been meeting now for the better part of the last 6 to 8 weeks, and we were able to reach an agreement that was filed. And I first want to compliment Senator Baucus, the Senate chair of the conference committee. There was a real effort made that this conference would operate the way a conference should operate, and that is the House and Senate members meeting, discussing the differences between the two bodies, and trying to reconcile their differences in a somewhat open process. We had several open discussions where we talked about some of the issues. Each member of the conference had a chance to express himself on the issues, and we had a good exchange. And I think during that exchange, we were able to reach some consensus. Almost immediately, we reached the consensus that all of us wanted to make sure that the payroll tax holiday was extended. The payroll tax holiday provides tax relief for 160 million Americans. This is not the time for paychecks actually to go down for American workers. We're trying to build confidence in the workplace, in the marketplace. And the more money in the paycheck allows people the opportunity to be better consumers, helping to create jobs. There was general consensus that we needed to extend the unemployment insurance, that we're still in the recovery where unemployment rates are so high that it's important that we use this counter-secular program to help people, but to also build our economy. It helps create jobs, again, having more money available for the consumers to help our small businesses and to help our economy. And lastly, we all understood that we couldn't allow a 27% cut in Medicare rates for physicians, that would deny many of our seniors access to health care. So very early in the conference process, we reached consensus that those three issues should be extended at least through the end of this calendar year. I mean, for the payroll tax holiday, that was our understanding, to extend it through the end of the year. We know that the Medicare issues really need to be extended for a longer period of time. We worked together, and I thought it was very important that we allow the full Senate, the full House, to consider that conference report. We've had too much gridlock. We've had too much individual members trying to block the consideration of important legislation, particularly in the United States Senate. So I think it's very important that we were able to bring this issue to the full Senate, and we're going to have, I hope, a good debate on this, and sometime tomorrow we're going to have a chance to vote on whether to accept the conference report or not. Now, there's some good news, and I really do applaud, again, Senator Baucus and my colleagues, Senator Casey and Senator Reid, on the work that was done by the Democrats on the committee. We took a very strong position against adding these extraneous provisions that came over from the House, the so-called boiler mat, which was a provision that would have affected the health of the people in our community. There is no question that if we would have accepted the House position, it would have weakened our Clean Air Act. It would have led to more premature deaths, more hospital admissions, more lost days from work. The cost-benefit ratio of this rule is well documented, that it will help our economy, help save the health, and help save work days for American workers. We also removed a provision from the House bill that dealt with the Keystone issue. This has to go through a regular regulatory process. It should have no place in this conference. We were able to remove that provision. On the unemployment insurance front, let me just mention that we were able to preserve the extension of unemployment insurance benefits. Under the current law, there's a maximum available of 99 weeks. But let me remind my colleagues that because of the way that the extended benefit program is calculated, that at least in my state by April, those 20 weeks are likely to be not available for new people who become unemployed. And throughout the rest of our nation, we're finding that the extended benefit programs will not be providing those extra weeks. So what the conference committee recommendations are is to try to use better triggers as it relates to the different tiers of benefits in the extended benefit program, so that the high unemployment states have a greater number of weeks than those states that are doing better, and to transition us to a more regular unemployment system as we go through the year. In regards to the Medicare provisions in this bill, we were able not only to extend the sustainable growth rate, the SGR system, so we don't get the automatic cuts that would occur against physicians. We were able to extend that through the end of the year, but we also extended the therapy caps. If we didn't do that, those who are victims of stroke or hip replacement would have ran into an arbitrary cap which would have denied them the therapy they need for their recoveries. We were able to get that done. And on the payroll tax, as I said earlier, there was an agreement that we would extend that. The payroll tax is all about helping 160 million Americans, and it's about creating jobs. Okay. That's where we were able to come to an agreement that I think was in the best interest of the conference. Let me talk about some serious problems that I have with the conference report. And it deals with how we decided to fund or offset the cost of unemployment insurance extensions. Let me remind my colleagues, Mr. President, that this is a short-term extension where we're phasing out the extra benefits through the end of this year. It's calculated to cost about $30 billion. Historically, we have extended unemployment insurance benefits during tough economic times without having offsets. Why? Because unemployment insurance is countersecular. It's there to help people during tough times. During good times, we pay money into the system. We're trying to put more money into the economy. And it doesn't make sense to take money out of the economy when we're trying to create jobs and getting our economy back on track. Unfortunately, that principle was violated in this conference report. The $30 billion is offset. Now, let me just compare that to the payroll tax holiday, which is $100 billion, which many of us think should be offset, which is not offset. And as you know, Mr. President, we came in with recommendations where we could fairly offset the extension of the payroll tax holiday without adversely affecting our economy. We had suggested that we would have a surtax on income exempting $1 million of taxable income from the surtax. A little bit of fairness in our tax code in order to make sure that we don't add to the deficit, don't hurt the economy, but allow middle-income taxpayers to continue to get their tax relief. To me, that would have been the responsible thing for us to do. But we didn't do that in this conference. Instead, we didn't pay for the $100 billion of extending the payroll tax, but we paid for the unemployment insurance benefits, $30 billion, which I would suggest to you we didn't have. That's an emergency. That truly is a matter that historically we have not paid for. All right, here's the problem. In order to pay for that $30 billion, we picked on our federal workforce. And I tell you, I find that wrong. We put a provision in this bill that will require new retirees, new federal employees, those who start work after January of 2013, to pay more for their defined benefit retirement benefits. That's how we funded about half the cost of extending the unemployment insurance. I think that's wrong. Let me just also say that the extension of the unemployment benefits is temporary, only till the end of this year. The extra cost for the retirement benefits is permanent. It stays in the law. Well, that doesn't seem like a good deal for what we were trying to do. We also are saying that one group of workers, and only one group, will make a contribution towards this. These are middle-income workers that are going to be paying for this, a large part of the unemployment insurance cost. I just don't think that's right. I don't think we should have done that. Let me also point out, as we talk about the federal workforce, that the additional costs that the new workers will pay, be 2.3% of their payroll, will go to a retirement trust fund that is already fully funded. So this is not to address a problem with the funding of the retirement plans for our federal employees. This is strictly, I think, a punitive hit at the federal workforce. Public servants have already given $60 billion towards deficit reduction in the form of a 2-year pay freeze, and will give at least another $30 billion if the base pay adjustment for 2013 is 0.5% instead of the 1.2%, which is what the adjustment should be under the Federal Employees Pay Comparability Act. Add it all together, and present and future federal workers are providing over $100 billion in deficit reduction. $100 billion in deficit reduction is coming out of our federal workforce. And yet the Republicans continue to defend the most affluent Americans who won't pay one extra penny for funding this payroll tax package. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's fair. And I don't think we should have done it in that manner. Now, I want to say some things about on a positive basis. You can always look at things and say it could have been a lot worse. And that is true. It could have been a lot worse. When you look at the House bill that included these provisions, it included a pay freeze for our federal workers. That's not in this. We got that out. I worked very hard with my colleague, Congressman Chris Van Hollen from Maryland. We worked together. In the original package, all federal workers would have had to pay more, including current federal workers. This package does not affect current federal workers. They will not have to pay extra for their pension plans. That's fair. When they signed up as a federal employee, they knew what the ground rules were. And they knew what the pension contributions would have to be and what the benefits were. It's right that we live up to that commitment. And this agreement will not affect current workers. Their pension contributions will remain the same. The bill that came over to us from the House also reduced pension benefits. We took that out of the bill. That's not in the bill. And the rate that they would have had new hires pay is higher than what we agreed to in this package. So Congressman Van Hollen and myself worked very hard to try to accommodate the parameters of the conference and what was being required of our federal workforce in a way that it would not penalize our existing workers and would not be anywhere near as punitive as the provisions that were put in the House bill. So we're at least grateful that the conference includes that, but I can't help but be disappointed that the unemployment insurance is being financed at least in half by a permanent change in the contribution rates to defined benefit plans by those who joined the federal workforce after January 1st, 2013. They're the only ones who are affected by that proposal. Mr. President, let me just conclude by saying that we all should be pleased that the conference worked, that we took a difficult issue in which there are strong fundamental differences between the House and the Senate, and we were able to come to an agreement to at least be presented to the members of the House and Senate for an up or down vote where each one of us can make our own judgments as to whether we think this is the right package for the American people or not. I might have a different view than the presiding officer. We'll be able to express our views by our votes tomorrow. I would hope that that process would be used so that we can get more work done for the American people. They want us to work together. They want Democrats and Republicans to say, okay, we know that you differ on issues, now get together and get things done. We have a transportation bill that's on the floor that we're talking about today. That transportation bill should end up on the President's desk. That transportation bill came out of our committees by bipartisan votes. So now let's not clutter that bill up with issues that will divide us. Let's work in the spirit that the conference committee that I was privileged to serve on worked on and try to keep it relevant to the issues at hand so at the end of the day we can not only pass the transportation bill in the United States Senate, we can get it passed in the House of Representatives or work out our differences and get it to the President for signature. That will create jobs, and by the way, I think the American people will applaud us for really moving forward with the people's business. That's what we need to do. And, Mr. President, if we can get that bill done, maybe, and just maybe, we can get other issues done. I've talked to my Republican colleagues, and they all agree that we can't allow sequestration to take place. That's these automatic cuts. If we can't do another $1.2 trillion of deficit reduction over the next 10 years, we should be able to get that done. We shouldn't have to wait to after the November elections. Let's take a lesson from how the conference committee that I served on worked. Let's sit down and work out our differences and not try to say it's got to be my way or we're not going to get it done. That's what's in the best interest of the United States Senate, and that's in the best interest of our nation. So I hope that we'll have a robust debate on the conference report. I hope each member will have an opportunity to review it. And at the end of the day, the majority we'll have a chance to see how the votes are. Again, I'm sorry that I have certain reservations about it and that I needed to express, but quite frankly, I think we need to stand up for our federal workforce who are out there every day providing services to our people, whether it's guarding our borders, whether it's finding the answers to the dread diseases, whether it's helping us develop the technology that will make America competitive, whether it's providing public safety as a correctional officer, whether it's helping us make sure we get our Social Security checks or get our disability checks. These are people that are on the front line that we're asking to do more with less, and they deserve not just the respect of this body, but they deserve our support. With that, Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Acosta.
Here's how the Hill is writing about the payroll tax cut deal that Senator Cardin was talking about. Congressional negotiators signed off on a sweeping package to extend the payroll tax cut, emergency unemployment benefits, and the Medicare reimbursement rate today, potentially paving the way for both chambers to consider the measure on Friday. Members of the conference committee tasked with dealing with those issues cast the agreement as a bipartisan achievement in a Congress that's been known for gridlock.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call on progress be vitiated.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent that I be recognized as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to announce that I introduced a resolution of disapproval today, just a few minutes ago, under the Congressional Review Act. A lot of people don't know what the Congressional Review Act is, but it's an act that will allow Congress to look at some of the regulations, and if there's something that they don't feel is in the best interest of the country, are able to introduce something to rescind that. And it would call for a vote, and the vote would be a 51 vote. And so it's one that has not been used very much, but it's a measure that would prevent, in this case, the Obama EPA from going through with its utility MAC rule. MAC, M-A-C-T, is the maximum achievable control technology, and that is used quite often because there are sometimes requirements in these EPA rules that require different industries to do things where there is no technology available to allow them to get that done. So the utility MAC is one of the most expensive environmental rules in American history, second only to President Obama's cap-and-trade rules, which he was unable to achieve legislatively. And left untouched, the utility MAC would destroy over 1 million jobs and cost the American economy billions of dollars. Now, my CRA, that's the Congressional Review Act, will be the moment of truth for a majority in this body who understand how harmful the Obama EPA regulatory agenda will be for their constituents. You remember last year at this time, 64 senators voted in different ways to rein in the EPA's destructive greenhouse gas regulations. And some of them actually, I had my bill out to do this, to take away the jurisdiction from the Environmental Protection Agency to rule, to regulate greenhouse gases. It was called the Energy Tax Prevention Act. Now, at the same time, there was another one that I call a cover vote. Sometimes when you want to tell people at home that you're against something, you can have a less, maybe severe vote, and there's happened to be a cover vote that takes place. The bottom line here is 64 of the 100 senators voted to do something about the overregulation that's coming out of the environmental protection agencies. And that particular one was on the regulation that would be the most expensive at all. The utility MAC that I'm offering the CRA on now is probably the second most expensive. But if you, to refresh your memory on this, in order to have the EPA have jurisdiction over the regulation of greenhouse gases, they have to somehow come up with an endangerment finding. They did, and they based it on science, the IPCC science from that was that gave to rise to the concern that was exposed in ClimateGate, and so I think everyone understands that was flawed science. But nonetheless, that's what they used, and that's why we were able to get 2/3 of this body objecting to the EPA regulating greenhouse gases. Well, I think that the bottom line now is that there are more than a dozen state Senate Democrats have claimed that they want to rein in the EPA because they know the devastating impact the agency's regulatory train wreck will have at home. These senators understand that if their constituents lose their jobs as a result of these overregulations, that they might lose their job. So anyway, today the United States Senate can look forward to having one more opportunity to stand up to President Obama's war on affordable energy. They can vote for this CRA, which will put a halt to one of the Obama EPA's most expensive and economically destructive rules. Under the utility MAC, it would cost American families, the analysis, and nobody really disagrees with this, the range is between $11 billion and $18 billion in electricity rate increases. That's over an 11% rate increase that would cost, on average, that would cost if we were to pass this utility MAC. The or if they under the regulations of the utilities. This would send ripple effects throughout the economy, causing approximately 1.4 million net jobs losses by 2020. It's not just jobs in the coal industry that would be affected. Dr. Bernard Weinstein of the McGuire Energy Institute of Southern Methodist University has estimated EPA's air rules could endanger 1 million manufacturing jobs outside of the coal and utility industry losses. Workers recently laid off in Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia are feeling the devastating impacts of the rule. And sadly, these lost jobs are all part of Obama's wider war on coal and fossil fuels. You might remember that he admitted this was his goal in the campaign of 2008 when he said, and this is a quote, he said, if somebody wants to build a coal-fired plant, they can do it. It's just that it will bankrupt them. And under my plan, this is quoting President Obama, under my plan of cap-and-trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket, unquote. When the cap-and-trade failed, Obama began aggressively pursuing these goals through an executive regulatory barrage of unelected bureaucrats. So companies like Solyndra got big cash payoffs while a regulatory train wreck was unleashed by the EPA to destroy America's fossil fuel industry. The political climate is much different now than it was from the days when global warming alarmists could bask in their historical gloom and doom predictions about the end of the world. Now that President Obama wouldn't dare say anything like that because the American people no longer are buying it. Instead, he's begun touting oil and gas development and saying that he's for an all-out, all-of-the-above energy strategy. In an election year, he knows the American people want the hundreds of thousands of jobs and affordable energy prices that come with domestic oil and gas. But he is clearly still determined to achieve his global warming agenda. His war on affordable energy is moving underneath the radar and wrapped in lies about protecting public health. Make no mistake, the train wreck will achieve all of Obama's global warming objectives, and it will severely undermine our nation's economy in the process. So I'll spend just a moment on that. The when President Obama could not achieve cap-and-trade through legislation, he said he would do it through regulation. The EPA's greenhouse gas regime will cost American families between $300 and $400 billion a year. This is kind of important because no one has refuted this. We've gone through, first of all, the Kyoto Convention, and that was a figure, a range that was given to us by the Wharton, one of the it was the Wharton Econometrics survey at that time, and several other, the MIT chimed in, CRA chimed in, and so the cost of regulating greenhouse gases would be about $300 to $400 billion a year. You know, when you talk about billions and trillions of dollars, I'm like everybody else. I have a hard time seeing how does that really affect us. In my state of Oklahoma, I regularly determine each year how many families in my state of Oklahoma are going to file a tax return. Then I do the math. This particular one at $300 billion a year would cost each family filing a tax return in my state of Oklahoma about $3,000 a year. Now, that's just not once. That would be every year. Now, what do you get for it? And this is the thing that I think is important, the American people finally have caught on, is that they have admitted that through the EPA, when you ask them if we were to pass one of these things regulating CO2 through the cap-and-trade legislation that we have defeated, would this reduce greenhouse gases? And the answer from the director or the administrator of the EPA was no, it wouldn't, because this is only would affect the United States of America. This isn't where the problem is. You know, China would still be doing its thing. India would be doing its thing. Mexico. I have contended that if you are regulating these in the United States, it could actually have the effect of increasing the emissions, because as we chase our manufacturing base overseas to find energy, they would be going to countries like China, like India, where they don't have the regulatory the restrictions on, that we have in this country. So That particular thing, the utility MAC rule, is second only to the greenhouse gas regulations in terms of what it would cost, in terms of costing the people, in terms of jobs and of money. And actually, the regulatory thing would be worse when you're talking about greenhouse gases, because under the bills that were introduced, and starting in 2003, that was the McCain-Lieberman bill, going all the way forward to the Waxman-Markey bill. The assumption has been that they would regulate industries and emitters that were over the 25,000 tons a year. Now, if you do it through regulation, as they're trying to do it right now, the Clean Air Act has a limit of 250 tons. So you'd be talking about regulating virtually every church, school, hospital in America, and not just the very large utilities. So anyway, that's where we were on that issue. On oil, President Obama has been congratulating himself on decreasing the imports of oil from the Middle East, but fails to mention that his policies have been consistently against oil and gas. In fact, he has actually said, and people in his administration have said, that they want to do away with fossil fuels. Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu, said that they wanted to, quote, boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. Well, that's, what, $7 or $8 a gallon. Right now we're looking at $4 a gallon. And that's what they want to do. And what's their motive? To do away with fossil fuels. He claims that to care about energy security, yet he stopped the Keystone Pipeline. The Keystone Pipeline, I'm very proud of a lot of the individuals, the senators in here who have talked about that. Senator Hoeven, for example, is very familiar with it because of the production in his state. Now, we're talking here about the sands up in Alberta and bringing them down through the United States. Now, I'm interested in this because Cushing, Oklahoma happens to be one of the intersections that is there for the pipeline. And so here's something that there's absolutely no reason to do away with except to kill oil, because we know that the pipeline is going to bring oil and bring down into the United States through, I might say, my state of Oklahoma, down to the coast where it can be used. And here we are, and a lot of people don't understand this because they've been told things that, quite frankly, are not true. In terms of oil, gas, and coal, the United States of America has the largest recoverable reserves in the world. Now, people keep saying over and over again, well, we only have 3% of the reserves, and yet we use 25%. Well, quite frankly, they're talking about proven reserves. You can't get a recoverable reserve until you drill, and if they don't let us drill because of the policies of this administration, then obviously we would be stuck with just the very small amount that we could produce. Nonetheless, it's out there. We're the only country in the world that doesn't that our politicians don't allow us to explore and to recover our own reserves. The only country in the world. Natural gas. We know what's happening right now. We know that in areas like New York and Pennsylvania, the Marcellus Bait, where we have opportunities that we have not had, we've never had in this country. We have the opportunity to recover more natural gas. And when the President had made a statement in the State of the Union message about being supporting of all the above and talking about natural gas, he slipped in one little statement there that says, well, we don't want to poison the earth, something like that. Well, what he's talking about is they have spent countless hours trying to regulate a process called hydraulic fracturing, a process, I might add, that was started in my state of Oklahoma in 1949. And there's never been a documented case of groundwater contamination since they've been using hydraulic fracturing. Now, you can't get into these tight formations without hydraulic fracturing. It can't be done. So the President can get by with saying that he wants to produce the natural gas that we have locally here, at the same time take over the regulation of hydraulic fracturing by the federal government. And we know what that would mean. In fact, I think the best evidence of that is President Obama, in his current budget, is doubling the funding for the anti-fracking agenda in the 2013 budget. Nuclear, you know, that's agreed. You know, we really believe in all of the above. You have to have fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, but also nuclear. It's a very important component of it. And it was interesting that only yesterday, President Obama sent his Energy Secretary, Stephen Chu, to Georgia to take credit for the 5,800 jobs that will be created when 2 new nuclear reactors are built there. As Secretary Chu said yesterday, now listen to this quote, he said, in his State of the Union address, President Obama outlined a blueprint for an American economy that is built to last and develops every available source of American energy. Nuclear power is an important part of that blueprint. Yeah, nuclear power is so important that President Obama forgot to mention it in his very long State of the Union message. And to send Secretary Chu to Georgia is kind of ironic, given that Chu is the one who said that nuclear power is the lesser of 2 evils. And it was the President himself who designated a chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission who had been leading the anti-nuclear energy for quite some time. As Chairman Yasko tried to delay the progress on licensing the very reactors in Georgia that they went up to try to take credit for. And it's just, we see this over and over again. Well, what does this all mean? President Obama knows he needs to talk the talk on domestic energy because people have caught on to the fact. I think people know now that we have the recoverable reserves to be completely free from the Middle East. All we have to do in a short period of time is to develop our own resources. Now, I know that my environmental friends are already saying about the CRA on utility MAC. The NRDC jumped on the story today with the headline, "Let Loose the Defenders of Mercury Poisoning," and nothing could be further from the truth. I remember so well in 2003 and 2005 when we had the Clear Skies Bill. The Clear Skies Bill would have had mandatory reductions. Keep in mind, we're talking about 2003. Mandatory reductions on mercury by 70% by 2018. Well, that was back in, so just a matter of a few years from now, that would be a reality. Just think about it. In just 6 years from now, we would already have a 70% reduction, and if the Democrats hadn't stopped the bill. And the reason they did is because we refused, we wanted to have SOx, NOx, and mercury, that are the real pollutants, reduced in that rapid of a fashion. Faster than President Clinton or anybody else has tried to do it. And they held it hostage because they also wanted CO2 included in it. So we got none of the above as a result of it. So the EPA's utility MAC is designed to destroy jobs by killing off the coal industry. EPA admits itself that the utility MAC rule will cost an unprecedented $11 billion to implement, and of course these costs will come in the form of higher electricity rates for every American. Importantly, the EPA also admits that the $11 billion in costs will yield a mere $6 million in direct benefits. Well, do the math there. It means that the agency has, by its own admission, completely failed the cost-benefit test. When Clear Skies had the advantage of reducing emissions without killing jobs, and the EPA's utility MAC would do little for the environment but destroy millions of jobs. Why did Clear Skies fail? As I said, it was held hostage because we didn't want us to reduce just SOx, NOx, and mercury, the real pollutants. They wanted to include CO2 also. Just before President Obama's decision to halt the ozone rule, which would have put hundreds of thousands of jobs at risk, then White House Chief of Staff Bill Daley asked, what are the health impacts of unemployment? Well, that's a good question. What are the health impacts of skyrocketing electricity rates, which hurt the poor the most? What are the health impacts on children whose parents will lose one of the 1.4 million jobs that will be destroyed by the EPA's rules on power plants? The United States Senate needs to focus on promoting policies that improve our environment without harming our economy. The EPA's utility MAC does just the opposite. My CRA, I think, is one, they say, well, you'll never get it done. And I've criticized people for bringing a Congressional Review Act up against regulations where I know the votes aren't there. It takes just 51 votes. And the reason I think the votes should be here now, if people understand, people at home care enough to put the pressure on, that's exactly what happened on the ozone requirements. They said, well, the President was committed to his own ozone changes. He changed his mind because of that. Remember the farm dust rule? The President was going to have a farm dust rule on emissions that would hit the air. And I always remember I had a news conference in my state of Oklahoma, in the western part of the state. We had a couple of people there from Washington who had never been west of the Mississippi. And we got down there in this area of Oklahoma, and we were talking about farm dust. And I said, well, you see this brown stuff down here? That's dirt. And you see that round green thing? That's cotton. Now hold your finger up in there, that's wind. Are there any questions? There's no technology to do that, and yet the expense to each of my farmers in a farm state like Oklahoma would have been hundreds of dollars a year and not accomplishing anything. Well, we were able to get the public to write in to complain about that, and as a result of that, the President pulled off. So I would just hope that enough people are concerned about utility MAC and its devastating effect on our economy and on jobs in America, that they will join in and apply the pressure necessary to help the people in this chamber understand that we should pass this Congressional Review Act and do away with this particular very harmful regulation that is before us. You know, I've often said that when you look at, a lot of people don't understand this, but presidents are the ones who put the budgets down every year. A lot of times they try to blame the House or the Senate or the Democrats, the Republicans. No, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. They are the ones who determine what the budget is. And during the Bush years, there were a total of $2 trillion of deficits in 8 years. However, after this budget came out just last week, in the Obama 4 years, the increase has been in deficits $5.3 trillion. That's $5.3 trillion in 4 years as opposed to $2 trillion in 8 years. Now, as bad as that is, I contend that the regulations of this administration are actually more expensive to the American people than servicing this debt. And so I think it's important that we talk about this. We talk about not just utility MAC, but all of these. Utility MAC is where we should draw the line, however, because that's one that directly affects our ability to provide energy for America, for our manufacturing jobs. We are right now just a little bit under 50% dependent upon coal for our ability to run this machine called America. If you do this, we would lose, it's anticipated, we would lose 20% of our generation capacity, and that translates into a lot of money, as I've just told. So that's what we've introduced today, and I encourage my Democrat and Republican colleagues to join us